inviting me here to speak a little bit about the
Magnus,
project.
Yes,
Yes, I will put it on the larger one in a few minutes. This is in a way a research that I started with together with Sevil Acar from Turkey a couple of years ago. It has evolved into a couple of more papers, but this was should we call it the original one, which was published in Ecological Economics. So you can see this as also I would say, a kind of methodological exercise, how to try to create these very long time series, challenging in itself. So I will explain to you how we did this first paper. One should also notice that there has been some studies also of other countries after we published this one, UK and the US, for instance. But this was the thing we did first for Sweden. The background, we used this concept, genuine savings. And this whole thing is just an attempt to construct genuine savings for Sweden. So it has not, should we say, a very complicated research question. It's just trying to do it and showing the basic development, the big picture, so to say. Anyway, this concept of genuine saving was first suggested by Pearson Atkinson as an indicator of what has been known as weak sustainability. This was also an article in Ecological Economics, if I remember correctly. And it basically models a economy environmental system where you have a high degree of substitutability between different types of capital or assets. So, and all of these types of capital or assets then produce well-being. So we have welfare services coming out of this. And if you use the genuine saving as a sustainability indicator, one can also notice that it has a rather clear policy prescription. So it has of course, but that is to reinvest adequately in capital, defined broadly. Could be produced capital, natural capital, social capital, and human capital. But building up the funds to compensate for what you're depleting, that is the main idea. The Norwegian oil fund is a very good example from the real world. You know, the Norwegians found oil in the North Sea in the early 1970s. It was started to be exploited, and for compensating the future development where these oil reserves are eventually depleted, they started to reinvest the resource rent into a huge, or initially a small fund, but eventually a huge fund. We can see here how the Norwegian oil fund is developing in this very moment. So it's currently 8 billion, moved over to another billion was earned there. So it's a huge fund, making sure that today the oil is depleted, they still have the income stream from the fund that should compensate for the loss of oil incomes. 8,000, yes. We should.
Billion Norwegian crowns.
Yeah.
2 times Swedish GDP.
2 times Swedish GDP. So this is 800 billion euros.
800 billion
Euros in a country with 4.5 million people. So it's a huge fund. So it illustrates the whole point with genuine savings without making it overly complicated. We can see how it develops at the end of the lecture. So anyway, I can turn over to this one. And as I said, the aim is just to estimate these historical developments. So it's not a complicated research question. And this is the reference to the main of the first article in the series. And the concept of genuine savings, basically what we try to do here is to departure from the net national saving, domestic investment and current account. And these figures has for Sweden historically been estimated by economic historians. Lennart Schön and Olle Krantz should be mentioned as the ones who constructed the main bulk of Swedish historical national accounts, including the normal national saving. But then we add current operating expenditures on education. We deduct the value of natural resource depletion. In the Swedish case, and I guess that this differs from what country you're looking at, we included timber to get a picture of the, should we say, developments in the 19th century, when quite a lot of the big trees in the forests were just cut down, so to say. Also iron ore is included in these estimates for Sweden. And then we also try to estimate and deduct the value of damages from pollutants of various kinds. I'll show you later how we did this. There are also some historical hypotheses. Since we are here in a group of economists, this is perhaps not the main, the interesting thing for you, but there are some discussions with some economic historians and historians also, but it's not really important for this presentation. But turning to natural resource depletion, and as I said, standing timber would be one of the things we try to estimate here. And there are some quite good, for being historical statistics at least, on especially timber, and also good estimates on the sawmill industry's timber consumption, and also firewood consumption and so on. So pretty decent historical reconstructions of this. For instance, Lars Östlund. What we're using here is a collection of stumpage prices. So we use them as net prices. So this would be the price of standing timber when you sell the tree standing. So that is before extract, logging and transportation and everything. So it's just the value of the tree, the standing tree itself. And then using these prices along with the estimate of how the volume of such trees developed as the sawmill industry expanded and so on. So generally you would have a decline in the forest, in the standing timber volume from approximately 1850 to 1920 perhaps, when it starts to increase again. Now we're on an all-time high, but that is the general development at least. For iron ore, we try to estimate the resource rent, and this resource rent times the ore extraction, the volume in tons. Also good statistics on this one. Well, this one requires some computing exercises. So depletion occurs if the resource rent is larger than zero. And how do we calculate this? We're using something called the net price method, originally suggested by El Serafi in a number of works. So what we do here is to take the part of the profits, and what we have used here is the main iron ore producer in Sweden, LKAB. But the part of the profits which exceeds the rate of return in comparable non-extractive industries, so the extra resource rent we try to estimate on investments as a proxy for the resource rent. So this is the part of the profit which is purely from the natural resource, while the other part of the profit is just return on any kind of, should we say, man-made capital. I mean, the equipment they use in the company. So that is how it's done. And so this means, of course, that we had to try to estimate the normal rate of return in the export industry for this period as well, which took some time to do. Here is the combined development of the timber and the iron ore depletion costs. So here we see rising costs in the 19th century, which has to do with extensive logging. Decline here, and again a rising depletion cost here, which has to do with the extensive iron ore extraction and the very high iron ore prices in 1950s and 1960s. Here they go down not because iron ore extraction vanishes, but the very high prices goes down, and the super profits in the iron ore industry declines. Damages from pollutants is another of the things we are trying to estimate here. Basically, what we do is to departure from the social cost of the pollutant in question and times the emission quantity. And the emissions that we have included in this study is carbon dioxide, which is the only pollutant in the World Bank estimate of genuine savings. So we go beyond the genuine savings definition by the World Bank. Fine particulate, this is small particles which are dangerous to breathe. Quite a lot of them back in the days when coal was combusted for residential heating, and also firewood for residential combustion gives quite a lot of these small things. Sulfur dioxide causing acidification, and also a rather large industrial pollutant in Sweden from not least the pulp and paper industry used quite a lot of sulfur, which ended up in the atmosphere. Then we received quite a lot of sulfur from England and Poland also, but we contributed ourselves also. But this is only the Swedish domestic emissions, so we didn't make an attempt to calculate the inflow from Britain and Poland. Nitrous oxides, also acidification and so on, not the least related to road transport and traffic. Also nitrogen to water from commercial fertilizers was included here. Not perhaps the most important of these ones. But the last one is interesting from a historical point of view. This is an attempt to calculate for the cost of poor drinking water, infected food back in the 19th century. And what we used here is the official statistics on causes of death for certain type of infectious diseases, which were mainly carried through infected water and bad food and so on. So this is a typical historical type of environmental problem, should we say, not existing today, but in the 19th century a major problem. So how do we do this then? To arrive at these damage costs with departure from contemporary estimates of the social cost of a pollutant, the damage that the pollutant is causing. We have used some studies by Runar, for instance, on sulfur, I think. So we don't, of course, have this type of estimates for the past, so to say, so we have to use the contemporary costs as a form of benchmark. And also in this study, if we call it the damage function, we assume that the damages are proportional to the amount of emissions. So it's nothing complicated there. 1 ton is causing this amount of damage, and if you have 2 tons, it would be 50 instead. I mean, so it's a very uncomplicated assumption on damages. Yeah, sorry.
Doesn't this mean that you run the risk of overestimating the damage cost? If you have a convex damage function,
yeah,
you would imagine that the marginal cost was much lower, the damage cost was much lower when we had low pollution.
Yeah. It could be. And looking at most of these pollutants, they were probably reached the peak in the 1960s, we guess, like sulfur, for instance. So 1960s would be probably where you have the highest marginal damage cost. But this is just like a first step, so we made it simpler. But for future things to come, experimenting with the, from an economic point of view, more realistic damage functions could be one way of developing this approach. Yeah, as I said, it can be modified. Yeah.
Where's the cost coming from? That data, the 5.
Yeah. The costs came from various contemporary estimates. I know Runar did some of these studies. So we simply took that type of investigations for different pollutants, mainly done by environmental economists in Sweden, usually for policy purposes, taxes and so on. But these are contemporary.
Did you use, for example, for CO2, did you use the Swedish CO2 tax?
I think we used Nordhaus for Nordhaus estimate.
Okay, Nordhaus estimate. Yeah, and it's much lower than the Swedish tax.
Yeah.
A third of the Swedish tax.
The Swedish tax is much higher.
For the whole time series, right?
Yeah, but I'll show you how we also did the deflation thing to get it in comparable economic values. So to do this, we used a kind of deflation procedure where we constructed a price index for each pollutant, which as closely as possible should reflect the prices of the type of capital that was affected. So say if you have sulfur, which mainly affects, say, forest, then the forest price would be important in this price index. Or if it was crops that were destroyed, some agricultural price index would be used. So but with these price indexes, we transform transform the contemporary prices to historical prices. For instance, if we have a pollutant that affects health, the price index would mainly be only be a wage index. While if it was natural capital, we would use agricultural prices or forest prices as, should we say, proxies for this. Carbon was even a more challenging thing because the social cost of carbon first needed to be discounted because the damages of climate change still lies mainly in the future. So as you know, you discount need a discounting procedure. And thinking about it, the present cost of carbon must have been much lower in 1850 as compared to today. So we transform first the whole series by discounting the price by 2% annually. And then on top of the whole thing, we also deflate this series. So this is a special procedure for carbon.
0.36, that's the Nordhaus.
That's the Nordhaus.
That's the Nord you get from the decimal.
Yeah.
Which is higher. Well, you're just 25.
Yeah.
It times higher.
Yeah. So this is how I'll show you the pictures first. Here are the actual Swedish per capita carbon emissions 1820 to 2013. So this is kilograms of carbon per capita. And this development, First World War, Second World War, the peak in the early 1970s, the late 60s, and the OPEC-1 crisis in 1973, and on top of it, the Swedish nuclear power program was started exactly in late 1972, really, but it was just pure luck, so to say, a reduction of the carbon emissions. So, and this one then shows, in principle, how the cost would develop. This is logs. So here is the discounted price, and here is a discounted price where we also have deflated the series with an investment deflator investment prices. So this one would be how this carbon price would have developed historically, and combining the two, this would then be the cost of carbon from a Swedish point of view. So you see the price, since it looks like this, transform this curve into something that looks like this instead. So this is the single most complicated emission estimate. These fine particles, we just used wages, since the fine particles affects human health, and some other price indices for other pollutants. So you see, even if they are in a way similar, you also see some differences in the development of these, should we call it, shadow prices, like this. So this one is fine particles, nitrous oxides and sulfur. And the difference in how they develop is because they are affecting different type of assets with different price developments since this. Infected water and food, as I said, one of the interesting things, I would say, motivated because probably looking at 1850, the number one environmental problem would have been biologically infected drinking water and food. So we took the number of reported deaths in cholera, typhoid fever, and dysentery, which are strongly related to bad water and bad food. And then we used as historical we could find, a evaluation of human life, which was used for traffic planning, CBA, for traffic in 1964. And then we deflated this one with the wages, because the cost would be basically the expected loss of future income, like that. And so this would be the development of the cost for infected drinking water, which just goes down to virtually zero in the 1930s, but starting from rather high death rates here and high costs. And here we would have the combination of, on the one hand, the number of deaths are falling. On the other hand, wages are going up, which would affect the shadow price for infected drinking water. Finally, human capital, which is based on expenditures on education, and as one would expect, it just keeps on rising, so to say. You could use other approaches for estimating human capital as well, but this one is from the methodological point of view the easiest one, I would say. And here we also use the historical national accounts estimates for cost for schooling and education. Just transform it. And then going back to estimate these genuine savings ratios, here we have normalized with GDP. So this paper then suggests that there was indeed a period of negative genuine savings in the later part of the 19th century. So Swedish industrialization would, according to our estimates, have been temporarily negative. But then the interesting switch would be around 1910, when economic growth and so on has started to increase. You have had this takeoff period, and then the ratio becomes positive. So according to this figure, at least if you look at these two graphs, it will be a possible shift around the early 1900s. That would be an interesting thing from a historical point of view, and then begging the question, how can a country switch from negative genuine savings to positive negative genuine savings, like this. We can also see the components. This is just for the period 1850 to 1910. Net savings normal going up, education going up, while depletion is still on the negative. Seems to fit the general story of the sawmill industry expanding and quite, should we say, ruthless cutting of the forest. More, should we say, modern forest policy appears only in the 1910s. And pollution still accounting for a negative effect even back then, and the main contributor here would be the poor drinking water and bad sanitary conditions.
What happened in 1856?
This is the impact of a cholera epidemic in Stockholm, killing 30,000 people. So I mean, there was disasters on different level as compared to today. That is it. So our findings like this, we suggest that the Swedish modern economic growth was preceded by a shift from negative to positive genuine savings. And we also find some structural breaks when testing for doing some econometrics on these time series. I didn't go into that in the presentation, but anyway, we test for structural breaks and find one in 1953 and another one in 1975. And then just speculating on what this could be, but 53, the Korea boom, the post-war economic growth really starts to really noticed. 1975, again increased net national savings and a decreased level of natural resource depletion, and also a rather large reduction of damages from pollutants such as sulfur and nitrous oxides.
As a result of the oil, less oil in the economy.
Yes, you have two effects, I would say. Less oil in the economy, but also a regulation of the heavy industry, such as paper and pulp and metal manufacturing and so on. I have quite dramatic reductions of emissions after 1975. So that is the main findings. Future developments. One is to test whether genuine savings can be used as a forward-looking indicator. Can we tell something about the future, looking at these natural resource stocks and so on? And we have tried to do some studies in that direction. Also testing for other types of damage functions than the simple ones assumed in the current paper, which exactly as Runar said, could overestimate damages. One can also think about adding more well-being indicators, increasing leisure time or whatever to expand the whole concept into measuring well-being. So basically those also looking more into detail in the change in the capital stock. But again, this is only for Sweden and an experiment, so it would, for instance, be interesting to see could this be done for the Canary Islands, for instance. I would guess that water is a much more important natural resource. It's not even included in the Swedish study, but so plenty of water have not been a problem unless you get it infected, so to say, but otherwise I think it would have been interesting to see if it would be possible to do something similar for the Canary Islands. But with that, I just finish the presentation as such, and thank you for listening.